What's going on, guys? Otaku here. So this most recent locals that I just went to, I ended up topping second place out of like 20-ish people with my current branded deck. A little while back I did a branded Predaplant deck. Well, since then I have recently scrapped Predaplants. I love the cards. It's just how the meta is changing and all that. They've started to slow the deck down, so I went more pure branded. And yeah, so this is gonna be my deck profile. Like I said, I got second place, and the only deck I lost to was the last round, which was against a Kashtira deck. I could have won, I just didn't get very good hands, and my opponent was playing around Nib, so I didn't end up getting to clear their board well enough. But like I said, I put up a good fight. I just wasn't able to keep the gas going. But yeah, so let's just jump into it. So to start, we of course have our 3 Aluber Gesture of Despias. This card, I don't need to explain it. This card gets the deck running. He searches out any of your branded spell or trap cards. 9 times out of 10 you're searching branded fusion with this card, but you can also kind of use it as imperm or effect veiler bait, just to kind of try it, especially if you already have branded fusion in hand. You can hopefully, if your opponent's not very smart on going against branded, maybe they'll even use Ash on this. But yeah, so like I said, this card, run this card at 3. This card gets the deck running. Then for the other 2 Despias, we are of course running 1 Ad Libitum, and I run 1 Tragedy. You can run more than 1 Tragedy. I only run the 1 just because most of the time you're only using this card to get it into the graveyard or even banish it for its effect to search out either Ad Libitum or Aluber, depending on context. But like I said, I don't usually run more than 1. Just because I've tried running 2, and then 9 times out of 10 I have been bricking on it. So 1 I think is perfectly fine. Then of course we are running 3 Fallen of Albaz. This one's very iffy. A lot of people say run it at 2. A lot of people say run it at 3. I personally run it at 3, mainly just because you want to have this card in your graveyard, but you also of course want to have it in your deck for branded fusion. So I think having as many copies as possible is very beneficial. But of course there is the chance that you brick on this, because if you draw this card at all in your opening hand, you're kind of in trouble. But if you draw more than 1 in your opening hand, you're really in trouble. Just being able to summon this card though, and hopefully steal one of your opponent's extra deck monsters, summon out Mirror Jade, really strong, only at the cost of a discard, is just very strong. But again, it can also, because your opponent wants to keep their monsters, it can be used as a bait to hopefully get some effects off. And then of course we do run 1 Albion the Shrouded Dragon. This card is treated as Albaz in the grave, which, like I said, we want as many copies as possible. So if you can have this in the grave instead of an actual Albaz, that's beneficial. But also its effect to be able to send a branded spell or trap to the grave, and then of course draw a card, is also very good. I usually use this to send branded opening to the grave, so that way my fusion monsters are protected from destruction effects. And then of course getting that draw 1. Then I run 2 Tri-Brigade Mercuriers and 1 Spriggan's Kit. Tri-Brigade Mercurier, it's a very good hand trap if you have a Fallen of Albaz fusion monster on the board, but also we use this card to search out any card that mentions Fallen of Albaz or Albaz himself when we banish it, which we will be doing that. And then Spriggan's Kit is kind of like a Luber. Spriggan's Kit is we have a Luber at home, basically. You can summon this via normal summon or special summon, and be able to search a branded spell or trap and put a card at the bottom of your deck. But also just kind of being another free body, because you can special summon this if you have a Fallen of Albaz fusion in the graveyard. Just very strong. And like I said, it's we have a Luber at home. If you don't somehow draw a Luber, or you just want to get an extra search off in case the Luber gets negated, you can summon this card and then still hopefully get your branded fusion. And then we of course run 1 Blazing Cartesia the Virtuous. You can run this at 2. I personally run it at 1, being able to special summon this card if you have Albaz on the field or in the grave, which, like I said, we want to kind of have this Albaz in the grave. Very strong. We search this with Tri-Brigade Mercurier and a future card later in the deck, just to be able to get it on the board. Quick effect poly, essentially. It's very strong. And then of course we need this as a fusion. This is a required fusion material to summon out the Dusk Dragon. So just very strong. Like I said, you can run 2. I personally run the 1. I then do run a small Bestial package in the deck. Bestials just are not as strong as they used to be now that tier limits have been hit. Most of what we were doing is we were running Bestials to counter out tier limits, being able to banish their cards. But now we're in kind of like a Kashtira-esque meta, so it's a little bit more difficult to maneuver that, seeing as none of their monsters are light or dark. But being able to just kind of bestial yourself, you can banish out the Mercurier, you can banish the Tragedy, and if you're going against the mirror match, these are also kind of good, but at the same time, you got to really pick your targets when it comes to the mirror match. But like I said, we run a very small package now. So 2 Magnamut, of course, just to search out either Albaz or one of the others. Lubellion, you can run this at 2. I only run it at 1 simply because it's like an $80 card, and I don't have that kind of money. And then 1 Saronir just to pitch some Branded Spell Trap to the graveyard. And then 1 Druis Worm just to be able to send something off, 1 special summon monster off my opponent's board to the graveyard. Because the goal is, of course, we get Lubellion in the grave, summon the Druis Worm, pitch the Druis Worm, etc., etc. And then I do run 1 Gimmick Puppet Nightmare and 1 Dark Magician. This should be a given on what I'm running these for. The Gimmick Puppet Nightmare is to, of course, lock my opponent out if I'm going first. Just to lock them out of being able to summon anything on their first turn with Branded Expulsion, which we'll get to that later. And then Dark Magician to summon the Red Eyes Dark Dragoon. As for hand traps, I only run 3 Nibiru, the Primal Being. We are in a meta where Triple Tactics Thrust and Triple Tactics Talent are very prevalent. They're being seen in a lot of decks. So running as minimal monster hand traps as possible is, in my opinion, very beneficial. Ash is still very strong. Effect Veiler, of course. But I'm trying to run as very little as possible, so that way I'm not giving my opponent any gas on their turn. So Nibiru, just to kind of clear the board, especially since Kashtiras are, of course, summoning nonstop, and you want to make sure they don't end on a lot of monsters. But we do have other negations later in the deck, but Nibiru is the only monster hand traps that we have in the deck. Moving on to spells, we, of course, are running 3 Branded Fusion. I believe in the Predaplant branded deck, I was running 2 of these. I was saying that because it had so much searchability, that running 2 was really all that was necessary. That can still be kind of applied here. I personally, in practice, have realized that running the 3rd one is a lot better, because even if you draw 2 of these, just kind of having another one on hand is very good. Yes, it is a once per turn, so if it gets ashed, you can't activate it for the rest of the turn. But again, just because it's searchable doesn't necessarily mean running 2 is the better play. But like I said, very strong card. This is along with a Luber, this is basically your main source to the deck, your main go-to. We don't run like Poly or anything like that, so this is your main fusion route. We then, of course, also run 3 Branded Opening. Again, I said I was running 2 of it in the last video, or in the last deck profile with the Predaplants. Now I am running 3 of them, just because with a lot less spaces being filled in the deck, we, of course, had a lot more to fill. And Branded Opening was... It just gets the deck started. It's a very good Ash bait, or just a very good Omni Negate bait. Because the discard is not for cost, so if they decide to negate this, you get to save a card. But of course, since it is not for cost, you do get the benefit of discarding Tragedy or just something else to really get the deck moving by also summoning a Luber. So I then also run 1 Branded Loss, just because it makes it so the effects of any fusion summoning card can't be negated, but also when you do fusion summon for the first time on your turn, you are able to search out a monster that mentions Fallen of Albaz, so you can either search Albion, Cartesia, Tri-Brigade Mercurier. You can search out basically anything in the deck that mentions Fallen of Albaz or Fallen of Albaz himself. Yeah, just a very, very strong card, sorry. And then we are running 1 Brandon in red and 1 Brandon in white. Brandon in red, of course, to bring Albaz or a Despian monster back to hand, hopefully summon out Guardian Chimera or something. And then Brandon in white. A lot of people are telling me not to run this card in the deck, but I found that it was very strong because you can use monsters in your graveyard as long as Fallen of Albaz is one of them, and of course by banishing them. I think this is actually extremely strong, especially if Brandon in red for some reason is not a viable option. This card actually won me a duel against a Labyrinth player. I was able to resummon Mirror Jade by using Mirror Jade in the grave and Fallen of Albaz in the grave. and summon out another Mirror Jade. And once I did that, Labyrinth player quit. He scooped. So yeah, I think it's a very strong card. It comes in it comes in a lot of clutch. But because it's so searchable with like Albion or just Aluber and all of them, like I said, Branded Red and Branded White to one. You can run 2 Branded Red. I just don't think in the current meta Branded Red is as valuable as it used to be. And then for the last of our like branded Despia spell cards, we are running a singular Despia Theater of the Branded. I have run into a couple cash players who are just focused on blocking the back row because of Labyrinth, and also because if we branded players don't have a back row to use, we can't use branded fusion. So I've been using Despia Theater of the Branded just kind of as an extra way to get some gas, because the Kashtira deck cannot block out field spell zones. So like I said, just it's another option. This card did almost win me that duel against the almost won me game 1 against the Kashtira player I lost to. I activated this and I fused Aluber with Tragedy, summoned out Quiritis, turned his Arise Heart to 0, and then swung for that. And then because my opponent was playing around Nib, Arise Heart was the only thing on his field, and he had like nothing left in hand. Thankfully for him, he drew the out, and he was able to go for game. But like I said, this card, I think at 1 is a lot of value, just because for like that Kashtira matchup. But I do think it also gives you more options in case Branded Fusion does get negated by like Ash or something. You still have other fusion options. As for the rest of the spells, I am running 2 fusion deployment. You can run 3. I personally would love to run 3. I just don't have the 3rd one right now. But this card is actually a lot stronger than you would think, since we are mainly a fusion deck, and our extra deck is flooded with fusion monsters. Realistically, it should be only fusion monsters. But so there is really no drawback to this card. This card can summon out not only Search, but it can summon Blazing Cartesia and Albaz just by targeting one of their fusion monsters. It can also technically search out Dark Magician by targeting Dragoon with it, but we're not doing that. But yeah, so like I said, I'd personally be running it at 3 if I had a 3rd copy, but I only have the 2. But 2 is perfectly fine. You can use this again just to kind of bait out effects, bait out Ash Blossoms, but also if they don't negate it, you summon out a free Albaz, use his effect to steal something on your opponent's board as fusion material, or summon out the Cartesia and get your combos started. So I then also run 2 Super Polymerizations. Again, another card that if I had a 3rd copy, I'd be running 3. But although 2, I think, actually does a lot better than the 3rd copy, just because, mainly because since tier limits are not so prevalent in the meta anymore, they still exist, but they're not as prevalent anymore. You're not seeing a lot of opportunities for Super Poly targets. So 9 times out of 10, I'm actually using Super Poly on my own monsters to dodge targeting effects, to build up bigger monsters, just again to dodge bigger effects, to possibly even get off my own effects off. But Super Poly is still very much an option. We just have less targets on our opponent's board for it. But like I said, running it too, still very strong. But if I had a 3rd copy, I would possibly be running the 3rd copy. And then for our last spell, I'm running one called by the Grave. This is just kind of insurance. Obviously it's a one of, but on those turns that we just don't have the strongest of hands, but we do draw this, we have some sort of security. It being only at 1, it's not as strong as it could be, but having it at the 1, of course, makes it so we can negate our opponent's hand traps if need be, or just negate other stuff. Like if they have, say we're going against Mathmech and they have a circular engrave and they summon a circular, we can just banish the circular engrave and negate those effects as well. But mainly it's for insurance for our searching effects, just so we can get them off. As for traps, I run 1 Branded Banishment and 1 Branded Expulsion. Branded Banishment is basically we have Super Poly at home, but it's also very good because the targets that are being used as fusion material do get banished instead of going to the graveyard. So very beneficial, especially against like that tier limit matchup if you end up going against it. And then also the branded expulsion. This is of course how we get the gimmick puppet out onto our opponent's board. But we also actually, when we get into the side deck, we'll talk about more about this. But we use this to actually summon out a different monster depending on the matchup. But yeah, branded expulsion. All we have to do is have a gimmick puppet, or have gimmick puppet nightmare in our grave and another monster. Get rid of one of our fusion monsters on our board, and then summon out the puppet on our opponent's turn. So that way, they can't summon anything for the rest of their turn. Well, they can normal summon, but they can't special summon unless it's a gimmick puppet. And then as for the remaining traps, we run 3 infinite impermanents. Like I said, we're not running monster hand traps, we're not running Ash Blossom or anything, so we do run the infinite imperm. This is basically effect Veiler, but better. Because we can use it on our opponent's turn as long as we have nothing on the board. And then, of course, it does negate a column on spells and traps. But like I said, it's a little extra interruption when we're not running any monster hand traps other than Nibiru. This is more of us trying to dodge the triple tactics thrust and triple tactics talent as much as possible. So yeah, that's the main deck. Let's jump into the extra deck. For the extra deck, we are running 2 Mirror Jade, 2 Lubellion the Searing Dragon, and 2 Albion the Branded Dragon. For our main Albaz fusion monsters. These all just kind of play with each other. I don't really need to explain them, but Mirror Jade, of course, is just like... Mirror Jade is, of course, just our boss monster. Quick effect banishment by sending one of these bad boys to the grave, and then an end phase search out Branded Spell or Trap and set it, which is the main reason Albion is in the extra deck. But of course, we do on occasion summon out the Albion because we have Lubellion, Cartesia, and Nibiru in the deck for light targets. Lubellion, of course, to be able to recycle our banished Fallen of Albaz, or just banished monsters in general for fusion materials to summon out something else as well. But yeah, like I said, they're just kind of the trifecta. You just want to run all 3 of these. And like at this point, if you don't realize that, I don't really need to explain it. As for the 2 new fusion monsters that were added in Photon Hypernova, I do run a single Dusk Dragon and a single Rinbrum. Honestly, you could probably run a second Rinbrum or even a second Dusk Dragon in case these effects get banished or Kashtira just gets rid of them, or the effects get negated or Kashtira banishes them. Because obviously if you're playing against Kashtira and they summon out like Unicorn or something, they're probably going to hit one of these guys if you're only running one of them. But Rinbrum, of course, just for the extra deck monster negate, and then possibly even sending them back to the extra deck or back to opponent's hand, depending on what you're targeting. Dusk Dragon, we use this to send either Albion, the Branded Dragon, to the graveyard from the extra deck, or even sending the gimmick puppet to the graveyard from the deck. Really just depends on how your hand plays out, but we use Dusk Dragon primarily just to get the puppet plays off, but again, we can use this to hopefully bridge into the next turn and kind of get some setup going with Albion. I then also run a singular Despia Quiritis and 2 Masquerade the Blazing Dragon. Quiritis is primarily being used just kind of as another way to summon Albaz, because if it gets destroyed, we can special summon Albaz from the deck. But also, Dusk Dragon can actually summon this by banishing itself from the field or graveyard as long as our opponent special summons a monster. And then, of course, Quiritis can, on the main phase, turn all our opponent's monsters' attack to 0. We do run 2 Masquerade the Tax Dragon because, as said, its attacks. This card won me the whole, the last duel, because we went to game 3 against the Labyrinth deck. And this card won me round 3 by I managed to summon 2 of these, and my opponent just kind of lost to time because he just kept hitting himself. But you could realistically only run 1 of these and and then sub something in instead. But yeah, and these are also kind of like super poly targets in a sense, because if our opponent has a light or dark monster and we have a Luber or ad libitum on the board, we can of course hit a Luber and then steal one of our opponent's light or dark monsters to summon out one of these guys. So these are like pseudo super poly targets in a sense. As for the last 4 slots in the extra deck, I'm running 1 Red Eyes Dark Dragoon, 1 Guardian Chimera, 1 Garua, and 1 Predaplant Dracostapelia. Dragoon really doesn't need an explanation. He's just a bully. He's a boss monster. You summon him out, pop effect, and negate by discarding a card. Guardian Chimera, primarily summon it via Branded in Red, just to pop some stuff on your opponent's board and draw some cards, etc., etc. Garua, we don't really use it a whole lot, but it is a super poly target, and but we also, on occasions, will send this to the graveyard via the Dusk Dragon effect and just get the free draw. Really just depends on where I'm at in card management and in terms of if my combo and all that has already been set up. And then Predaplant Dracostapelia, kind of just a staple in the fusion department. However, I did not once summon this during the entire locals that I topped at. So there's a good chance that I might just cut this and put something else in, like Alba Lenatus or something. It's a very good card, quick effect Predaplant counter, which can hurt Xyz centered decks like the Castiras, because anything with a Predaplant counter is level 1. And then, of course, anything with a Predaplant counter while this is on the board has its effects negated, which is very, very strong. And again, it is kind of a micro pseudo super poly target, because if you have a fusion monster and your opponent has a dark monster, or vice versa, you can summon out this card with super poly. But I think at this point, this card's taking too much resources to summon, and it's not, at this point, a whole lot worth it anymore, because there's not a lot of fusion decks running around right now, so you have to use one of your own fusion monsters, something that realistically we're not willing to spend at this point. So again, I think if anything, I would probably cut this and put like Alba Lenatus or just a different fusion monster in general, probably another Albaz fusion monster. So moving on to the side deck, I actually messed up at this locals. I was playing at a disadvantage, and I only had 13 out of 15 side deck cards. I did not have the triple tactics talents that I thought I had. I ended up trading them away at some point and just didn't realize I had no more. So there are actually 2 side deck cards missing in this side deck, but just know that they are filled with triple tactics talent. So like I said, we would run 2 triple tactics talent, and then moving on to the rest of the side deck. So we have a good bit of like Trap Tricks and Labyrinth counters, because those cards do hurt us a lot if we don't respect them. Those are strong decks, and we have to properly respect them. So the first little batch of support, or I guess counters against those decks, is of course 1 Harpy's Feather Duster and then 2 Cosmic Cyclones. Cosmic Cyclone, just a quick effect, banish, so that way our opponent doesn't get the chance to activate them. If we have this set or something, that way we can just banish them, get rid of them, not have to worry about them. And then of course Harpy's Feather Duster, just kind of sweep everything off the board. And then also, this is also kind of like Runic adaptability. Like, we can use this to go against Runic as well, but Runic, we're just not seeing Runic a lot right now, but this can be used for them to banish like the fountain or something. But the last card that we use to counter out Labyrinth and Trap Tricks is actually, welcome back to 2006, ladies and gentlemen, we have Jinzo. So Jinzo, we can actually, funny enough, summon with Branded Expulsion. Expulsion just targets 2 monsters in your graveyard and then summons them. So we can actually, I used this against the Labyrinth matchup. My opponent on, I believe, game 2 went first, but I went second, and then for some reason they didn't manage to get rid of my back row, which I was able to make Branded Expulsion. And then basically on my opponent's turn, activated Branded Expulsion, summoned out, I believe it was, I think I just gave him a Luber, and then I summoned out Jinzo on my field, and basically my opponent couldn't do anything. However, like I said, we went to game 3, so he actually managed to get rid of the Jinzo. I don't remember how, but very strong just against those Trap Tricks and Labyrinth matchups, because like I said, it can be any 2 monsters from the graveyard to summon. It doesn't have to be the puppet. So usually I swap out the puppet for Jinzo if my opponent is running a trap-centered deck. I then run 1 Winged Dragon of Raw Sphere mode and 2 Radian, the multi-dimensional kaijus. I don't own 3 copies of Sphere Mode. I actually only own the one. So that way because of that, I do run 2 of the Kaijus, the Radiant Kaijus. Mainly just because light and then dark. That way we can use them for like Albaz plays. Hit them with a Kaiju, summon out Albaz, and then fusion summon. But but this is mainly for like the Kashtira plays, but also I have used this against other decks. It's just a very strong thing to be able to get rid of their monsters without fear of negation. And the only issue is that Winged Dragon Maw does use your normal summon, so if you have a Luber, you got to be careful about that. But like I said, just very strong. And then as for like our other Kashtira counters in the side deck, we have Book of Lunar Eclipse. This card is not as good as Book of Eclipse. I just don't have enough copies, and I run Book of Eclipse in Plunder. So I run Book of Lunar Eclipse in this. Still very strong. Target 2 cards, put them face down instead of all cards on the board. You do have to discard. So not nearly as good, but we can work with it. And of course, if our opponent manages to get one of our targets off the board, then if it doesn't go off. So again, Lunar Eclipse is not nearly as good, but I'm working with what I've got. Still very strong though. So if you don't have Book of Eclipse, then Lunar Eclipse is a very good substitute. As for the last card in our side deck, we are running the best board breaker in all of Yu-Gi-Oh!, which is evenly matched. So I only, of course, put this in if I know I'm going second, just because if I draw that on turn 1 and just moved battle phase, my opponent loses their entire board, essentially, all but 1 card. Like I said, best board breaker in all of Yu-Gi-Oh! But you can also use this to bait out Omni Negates, just mainly get one more off the board, and hopefully main phase 2, because of that, you can get some gas. But yeah, so that is it for my branded deck profile. Like I said, it's pure branded. I don't run Predaplants anymore. And like I said, it did top my locals. Got second place out of like 20 people. Only lost to 1 Kashtira deck. Very, very strong deck. Let me know what you think down in the comments down below, and let me know if you want to see more deck profiles. Like I said, I have a Plunder deck that I'm currently running, seeing a lot of good results, just haven't topped with it quite yet, and then I am working on a Madolche deck, so just let me know what you all think, and yeah, have a wonderful day. See you all in the next video.